My chest hurts when I breathe. The Millionaire CEO found a little girl dying on a snowy bench. And, hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a cold December evening, the kind of night where the city lights flickered like stars in the distance, casting long shadows against the frosty streets. Caleb Whitmore, a Millionaire CEO, walked alone down the snowy sidewalk. His crisp black coat was perfectly tailored, and his polished shoes made no sound as they glided over the ice. To anyone who saw him, he looked like the epitome of success. But to Caleb, it all felt meaningless. The holiday cheer in the city only made the emptiness in his heart feel more pronounced. His phone buzzed for the 5th time that evening. Another Merry Christmas message from a colleague. Another reminder that, despite his wealth, he had no one to share it with. He shoved the phone back into his pocket and kept walking, his breath misting in the cold air. As he walked past a bench near the park, something caught his eye. A small figure curled up on the bench, shivering violently. At first, Caleb thought it was a discarded coat or a bag left behind. But then he heard a faint sound almost like a gasp for air. His steps faltered as he realized it was a little girl, barely 7 or 8 years old. Her face was pale, and her body trembled under the thin fabric of her coat. She was clutching something in her arms, a bundle of tattered cloth, as if trying to protect it from the cold. Caleb's heart skipped a beat. He rushed forward, crouching down beside her. "Hey," he said softly, his voice shaking with concern. "Are you all right?" The girl's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Caleb saw nothing but fear in her eyes. She looked at him for a long time before speaking in a barely audible whisper. "My chest hurts when I breathe," she said, her voice fragile, as if each word caused her pain. Caleb's stomach tightened. He quickly lifted her into his arms, feeling how cold and frail she was. She was barely responsive, her tiny body limp against his chest. He knew he couldn't just leave her there. Without thinking, he carried her to his car, ignoring the cold seeping into his own clothes. He called his driver to meet him at the curb. The car pulled up, and Caleb rushed inside, his heart pounding as the girl clung to him. "Massachusetts General Hospital," he said, his voice firm. But beneath it, there was a layer of fear. He didn't know what was wrong with her, but he knew it was bad. As they drove through the snow-covered streets, Caleb held her close, his hand gently pressing against her back as if trying to warm her. The silence in the car was broken only by the sound of the engine and the soft hum of the heater. Caleb stared down at the girl in his arms, wondering who she was, why she was alone, and how she had ended up in such a terrible condition. His thoughts were interrupted when he felt her hand tighten around his sleeve. She looked up at him, her eyes cloudy, but still filled with desperation. "Mommy's really sick," she whispered. Caleb froze. Everything around him seemed to stop, and for the first time in years, he felt something inside him stir. This wasn't just a random act of kindness. This was a moment of reckoning. He didn't know what to do. But somehow, he knew he couldn't turn his back on her. The car sped through the snow, heading toward the hospital, as Caleb made a silent promise to the little girl in his arms. He would not let her suffer alone. He would help her, no matter what it took. The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Caleb Whitmore sat in the back seat of the sleek black town car, holding the frail girl in his arms, trying to keep her warm. The car's heater hummed softly, but the chill that had settled into his bones remained. He watched the city's streetlights blur into streaks of yellow and white, his mind racing. Every time he glanced down at the girl, her small body seemed to grow heavier in his arms. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps, and her tiny hand clutched his sleeve as if she were trying to hold on to something. Anything. To keep herself grounded in the moment. Caleb wasn't sure what to think or how to feel. His instincts told him to help her, but deep down, something in his chest gnawed at him. He wasn't a doctor. He wasn't qualified to help her. The best he could do was get her to the hospital. That was all. But still, he couldn't shake the feeling that her being here, in his arms, wasn't just an accident. It felt too significant. The words she had whispered to him earlier, "Mommy's really sick," kept replaying in his mind like a haunting melody. Caleb's stomach tightened. What kind of life had this little girl led? Why was she out in the cold, alone, on a snowy bench? He wanted to know more, but the thought of asking her more questions seemed too much for her fragile state. He didn't want to scare her. He just wanted to get her help. The car finally pulled up in front of Massachusetts General Hospital, its lights glowing like beacons in the snowstorm. Caleb rushed out of the car, holding the girl tightly in his arms, and headed toward the entrance. The cold air bit at his skin, but he didn't feel it. All he could focus on was getting her inside. The hospital doors opened, and Caleb was immediately met by a nurse who led them to a triage room. As the nurse checked the girl's vitals, Caleb stood frozen in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He could barely bring himself to speak. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. Very wrong. He watched as the nurse took the girl's temperature, listened to her chest, and asked him a series of questions that Caleb could hardly process. Is she allergic to anything? What's her medical history? The nurse's voice sounded distant, as if coming from far away. Caleb could barely focus on her words. All he could think about was the little girl, her fragile form, her soft, labored breathing. He felt a pang of guilt. What kind of world had they both ended up in? How had this moment come to be? He had spent so much of his life focused on power, wealth, and control. But none of that mattered now. None of it could help him save this little girl. As the nurse prepared to take the girl for further treatment, Caleb stepped closer. "Her name is Ava," the girl whispered softly, her voice barely audible, but full of desperation. Ava. The name echoed in Caleb's mind. He didn't know why, but it felt like a clue, like a thread leading him deeper into the mystery of this moment. The nurse nodded and gently took Ava's hand, guiding her to another room for tests and treatment. Caleb stood there, paralyzed. He didn't know what to do. He had been a successful businessman for so long, always making decisions in an instant, always in control. But now, standing in this sterile hospital corridor, he realized he had no idea what to do next. His mind raced. How could he help her? What could he do? The only thing he could think of was the promise he had made in the car to keep her safe. But how? He didn't even know who her parents were. He didn't know where she came from. He only knew that her words, "Mommy's really sick," had struck a chord deep within him, one that he couldn't ignore. Ava was someone's child. She wasn't just a little girl in need of help. She was a person with a past, a life, and a family that had led her to this moment. And Caleb, for the first time in years, felt the weight of his own humanity pressing against him. He had always thought of himself as a man of logic, of reason, of control. But standing here, in this sterile hospital, he realized that it was his heart that had been lost all these years. Not his mind, but his ability to feel, to connect. His mind still raced with thoughts of his business, his empire, But for the first time, in a long time, his heart was no longer silent. And as he stood in that cold hospital corridor, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not with Ava's life hanging in the balance. He couldn't just be the CEO anymore. He had to be something more. He had to be someone who cared. As the hours passed in the sterile hospital waiting room, Caleb sat with his hands clenched tightly together. His mind a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions he had never allowed himself to feel before. Ava had been whisked away into the care of doctors and nurses the moment they arrived. But Caleb couldn't shake the image of her small, fragile body. Her wide eyes filled with fear. He could still hear her voice, soft and broken, as she whispered to him, "Mommy's really sick." Those words echoed in his mind, over and over again. He had promised to keep her safe, but what did that promise even mean? He wasn't her father. He didn't even know where her mother was. Yet somehow, the moment he saw Ava, something inside him shifted. For years, Caleb had lived in a world of cold calculations, of boardrooms and business deals. He had everything: money, power, respect, but none of it had ever brought him peace. None of it had ever made him feel truly alive. But Ava had reminded him of something he had long forgotten. She had reminded him of human connection, of the fragile beauty of life. He stood up suddenly, his thoughts overwhelming him. He couldn't just sit here anymore. He had to know what was happening to her. He walked toward the nurse's station, his strides purposeful, though his heart beat faster with every step. He approached the nurse on duty, trying to steady his voice. "How is she? Is she going to be okay?" The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, gave him a small smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "We're doing everything we can," she said gently. "She's been very weak, but we've stabilized her for now. She's still critical." Caleb nodded, his stomach churning with guilt and fear. He felt helpless. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to do. He had always been the one in control, the one who made things happen. But with Ava, it was different. This little girl, who had been abandoned in the cold, who had whispered about her sick mother, had somehow gotten under his skin in a way no business deal ever had. He couldn't explain it, but he couldn't ignore it either. He needed to help her, to do something. He turned away from the nurse's station, his mind racing again. There had to be something he could do. He had resources. He had connections. He could hire the best doctors, the best specialists. But what about her mother? Who was taking care of her? Caleb couldn't stop thinking about that phrase. "Mommy's really sick." Ava had been so young, so vulnerable, yet so brave. She had been trying to take care of someone, even though she could barely take care of herself. Caleb walked back to the waiting area, his thoughts turning over and over again. He tried to imagine what it would be like to be in her shoes, to be that small, to be that alone in the world. He couldn't. The idea of it broke him. He had never known real loneliness. He had always been surrounded by people, by business, by wealth. But Ava was different. She had no one. His phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his thoughts. He pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from his assistant. "Caleb, there's a situation at the office. You need to come back in." He stared at the message for a long moment. The office, the deals, the presentations. It all seemed so far away now. He had no interest in going back to that world. Not while Ava was here. Not while she needed him. He typed a quick reply, telling his assistant to handle things without him. He wouldn't be going back. Not yet. He couldn't. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps. He looked up to see the doctor, who had been attending to Ava, walking toward him. The doctor, A middle-aged man with kind eyes stopped in front of him, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Mr. Whitmore," he began, "Ava's condition is critical, but she's hanging on. We've run some tests, and we suspect she may have been exposed to severe malnutrition and possibly some trauma." Caleb's heart dropped. Malnutrition. Trauma. He couldn't imagine what the little girl had been through. "Is there anything we can do?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor hesitated for a moment before responding. "At this point, it's mostly about stabilizing her. We'll keep monitoring her, but it's important to know that she's going to need a lot of care moving forward. She may need to stay here for an extended period." Caleb nodded, his mind racing. He needed to find her mother. He needed to understand what had happened to Ava, to make sure she didn't go through this alone. He had the resources, but more importantly, he had the will. And something deep inside him told him that this little girl, this fragile soul, had just changed the course of his life. He wasn't going to walk away from her. Not this time. He had to find out the truth. He had to keep his promise. As the doctor turned to leave, Caleb stood there, staring at the hospital room where Ava was being cared for. His life, his world, had just shifted, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Caleb sat in the small, sterile hospital room, his fingers tapping nervously on the armrest of the chair. He had spent the last few hours pacing, unable to sit still as his mind raced with thoughts of Ava and her mysterious condition. The doctor had left him with the unsettling news that she was still in critical condition, and there was little they could do until they understood more about what had happened to her. Caleb's heart ached as he thought about the little girl, her pale, fragile body, her tear-filled eyes as she whispered about her sick mother. She was so young, yet so burdened by a world that had already hurt her so much. Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that her pain had only just begun. He stood up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor, and walked to the window. The snow was still falling outside, the world blanketed in a cold, unforgiving silence. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, he had been walking through the city, lost in his own thoughts, indifferent to the world around him. Now here he was, consumed with concern for a little girl who had somehow found her way into his life. He didn't know what to do next. His business was still running, his empire still needed him, but none of that seemed important anymore. Ava needed him, and for the first time in years, Caleb felt something stir inside him, something more than just duty or obligation. It was the stirring of his own humanity. As he stood there, looking out at the snowy landscape, a thought crossed his mind. What if he could do more for her than just provide medical care? What if he could help her find the safety and love she had been denied? What if he could be the one to show her that the world wasn't all bad, that there were people who cared, people who would protect her? The thought hit him like a wave. He had the resources, the connections, the means to make a real difference in her life. But more than that, he had something else now. He had the desire to do something good, something meaningful. Caleb turned away from the window, his mind made up. He walked back to the door and opened it, stepping into the hallway. He needed to speak with the doctor again. He needed to know more about Ava's condition, but more importantly, he needed to understand what had brought her here in the first place. Who was she? Who was her mother? And why had this little girl ended up alone on a cold bench in the middle of a snowstorm? He didn't have all the answers, but he was determined to find them. The doctor was just finishing up with another patient when Caleb found him, and he stepped aside to let Caleb speak. "Doctor," Caleb said, his voice firm but quiet, "I need to know more about Ava. What happened to her? What can I do to help?" The doctor hesitated, looking at Caleb for a moment before speaking. "She's in critical condition," he began. "Her blood pressure is dangerously low, and her body is fighting off a number of infections. She's been through a lot, and it's hard to say what caused it all. We suspect that she's been exposed to neglect and possibly abuse. It's clear that she's been malnourished for a long time, and her body has taken a serious toll. Caleb felt his heart drop. Neglect. Abuse. He had feared as much. The realization hit him like a gut punch, but he didn't let it show on his face. He had to stay strong for Ava. "What can I do to help her?" Caleb asked again, his voice desperate now. The doctor looked at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. "There's not much we can do right now other than monitor her and make sure she's stable. She'll need a lot of care, and she may need to stay in the hospital for an extended period. But what she really needs is a stable home, a place where she can feel safe." Caleb's stomach churned as the doctor's words sunk in. A stable home. The idea of Ava being in a loving home, away from all the pain and fear she had endured, felt like the only hope left for her. But could he really be the one to give her that? Could he? A man who had spent so many years building an empire, a man who had never known what it meant to care for another person the way a parent should, really be the one to step in and give her the stability she so desperately needed? Caleb wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He couldn't let her go. He couldn't let this little girl slip through his fingers. As he looked back at the door to Ava's room, Caleb made a silent promise to her. He would do whatever it took to protect her, to help her heal, and to give her the family she deserved. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. He had a chance to make a real difference, and he wasn't going to let that opportunity pass him by. Caleb stood in the dimly lit hallway of the hospital, his mind racing with questions he couldn't answer. Ava had been moved to a private room, the steady beep of monitors the only sound in the otherwise silent space. He had insisted on staying by her side, unable to tear himself away from the fragile little girl whose life had suddenly become so intertwined with his own. He had never imagined that one small act of kindness could change everything. The last few hours had been a blur. Doctors running tests, nurses coming in and out, and Ava, still so weak, barely able to keep her eyes open. Caleb watched her sleep, his heart heavy with a mix of emotions. He had promised to protect her, but he wasn't sure what that would even look like. How could a man like him, a man who had built his life around wealth and power, be the one to give her what she needed? Caleb had always been a man of logic, of reason. He solved problems with numbers, with decisions, with strategies. But nothing about this situation felt logical. Nothing about Ava's life made sense. She was a child, too young to have endured the things she had. The thought of what she must have gone through alone, in the cold, without anyone to care for her, made his chest tighten with guilt. He had spent so much of his life focusing on his career, his empire, his own success. But now, as he sat in this sterile hospital room, he realized that none of it mattered. None of it could help Ava. The doctors had told him that they would need time to stabilize her, that her body was still weak from malnutrition and possible trauma. But they were hopeful, and Caleb clung to that hope. He had to. He couldn't bear the thought of losing her. As the hours passed, Caleb found himself lost in thought, thinking about how he could help her. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Ava was still so young, and the emotional scars she carried would take time to heal. But Caleb was no stranger to hard work. He had spent his entire life building something from nothing, and now, for the first time, he knew that the most important thing he could build wasn't an empire or a fortune, it was a future for Ava. The question was, how? How could he make a real difference in her life? He thought about her words again. "Mommy's really sick." Caleb's mind raced with possibilities. Who was her mother? Where was she? Was she still alive? And what kind of life had Ava led before she ended up on that cold, lonely bench? Caleb's thoughts were interrupted when a soft knock echoed at the door. He stood up quickly, wiping his hands on his suit before opening it. It was the doctor, the man who had been treating Ava since her arrival. "Mr. Whitmore," the doctor began, his voice calm but serious. "I wanted to give you an update on Ava's condition." Caleb nodded, his heart racing. "Is she okay?" he asked, his voice tight. The doctor hesitated before answering. "She's stable for now. We've managed to stabilize her blood pressure and temperature, but we've run more tests, and there's still a lot we don't know. It's clear that she's been neglected for quite some time, and there are signs of possible abuse." Caleb felt his breath catch in his throat. Abuse. The word echoed in his mind. He had feared as much. How could anyone hurt a child like Ava? The thought made his stomach turn. He clenched his fists, trying to suppress the anger that bubbled up inside him. He looked at the doctor, his voice barely a whisper. "What can I do to help her?" The doctor gave him a sympathetic look. "What she really needs right now is a stable home. Somewhere safe. She's been through so much, and it's clear that she needs someone who will look after her, protect her. The emotional scars may take years to heal, but right now, we need to focus on getting her physical health back to normal." Caleb nodded. He already knew what he had to do. He had to take responsibility for her. He couldn't let her fall through the cracks. He had the resources, the means, and now he had the drive. He couldn't be the man who walked away from this. Ava needed him, and he would not fail her. The doctor continued. "I understand this is a lot to take in, but we're going to need time. Ava's health is our top priority right now, and we'll keep you updated as we learn more. But we'll also need to find her a more permanent place to stay once she's well enough." Caleb nodded again. "I'll make sure she's taken care of," he said, his voice firm. The doctor smiled, then turned to leave. Caleb stood in the doorway, watching him go, and then slowly closed the door behind him. He walked back to the chair beside Ava's bed, his mind made up. He was going to be the one to give her the safety and love she had never known. It wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in his life, Caleb felt a sense of purpose beyond the numbers, beyond the boardrooms. He wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a man with a mission, and he would do whatever it took to make sure Ava's life was filled with the love and stability she deserved. He was her protector now, and he wouldn't let her down. The following weeks were a blur for Caleb Whitmore. His world, once dominated by meetings, phone calls, and business deals, had shifted dramatically. Ava had slowly improved, but the trauma she had endured was far from over. Caleb had spent countless hours at the hospital, working with doctors, ensuring that she received the best care possible. But something else had been growing inside him during this time, an overwhelming sense of responsibility. As each day passed, he became more certain that he couldn't just be a temporary part of her life. He had to be there for her long term. He couldn't bear the thought of her being moved from one foster home to another, bounced around like so many children who never found the love and stability they needed. He needed to be the one to give her that. But that idea raised a million questions. How could he, someone who had never even thought about having children, be a father to her? Could he truly provide what she needed? Was he capable of the patience, the nurturing, the love she so desperately craved? These were questions Caleb had never asked himself. He had spent his life focused on business, on building a legacy, on achieving success. But now, as he sat by Ava's bed in the small, quiet hospital room, he couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in his chest. He had to do this. He had made a promise to her, and for once in his life, he wasn't going to break that promise. Ava was no longer just some little girl he had found on a snowy bench. She was his responsibility now, and he would do whatever it took to help her heal. As he sat there, watching her sleep, the door opened softly, and the doctor stepped in. Caleb stood up immediately, his thoughts momentarily interrupted. The doctor gave him a small, tired smile as he approached. "How's she doing today?" Caleb asked, his voice hoarse. "She's stable, Mr. Whitmore," the doctor replied, pulling up a chair beside Ava's bed. "She's eating a little more, and we've seen some improvement in her energy levels. But there's still a long road ahead. She's not out of the woods yet." Caleb nodded, his stomach tightening at the thought. "What can I do to help her? Is there anything more that can be done?" The doctor paused for a moment before speaking. "At this point, the most important thing is emotional support. She's going to need a lot of care and comfort, and I'm sure you know that. What she needs most right now is stability, and someone who can provide her with a sense of safety. I'm not just talking about a roof over her head. I mean true safety, someone who will show her that she is loved, someone who will help her feel secure again." Caleb's heart swelled at the doctor's words. He knew this already. He had already made up his mind. But hearing the doctor say it aloud made everything feel more real, more urgent. "I'm going to take her," Caleb said, his voice steady. "I'm going to be the one to give her that safety." The doctor looked at him carefully, as if measuring his sincerity. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Whitmore. It's a big step, and it's going to take time. But I think you're the right person to help her." Caleb didn't know if he was the right person, but he wasn't going to back down. He had never been one to walk away from a challenge, and this felt like the most important challenge of his life. He had seen the worst of the world in his career, but he had never seen anything like this, anything that made him want to fight harder. As the doctor left, Caleb sat back down in the chair beside Ava. He looked at her small, peaceful face, the fragile features that had been so filled with fear just weeks ago. She was beginning to trust him, beginning to feel safe, and that trust meant everything to him. He knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments when the weight of this responsibility would feel too heavy. But he wasn't going to quit. Not when she needed him. Caleb was determined to give her the family she had never had. He was going to show her that the world wasn't all bad, that there was kindness, that there was love, and he would be the one to give it to her. He had made a promise, and this time, he wasn't going to break it. He sat there for hours, lost in thought, watching over her as she slept. His mind wandered to the future. What would life look like for them? Could he balance his career with raising a child? Could he be the father she needed? The questions lingered. But in the end, Caleb knew one thing for certain. He was ready. Ready to do whatever it took to protect her, to care for her, to give her a life full of love and security. Ava deserved that much, and Caleb was going to make sure she got it. It had been 3 weeks since Caleb made the decision to take Ava into his care. Every day was a new challenge, a new learning experience. He had never imagined what it would be like to be a parent, let alone a single parent. But here he was, trying his best to provide for this little girl who had captured his heart in a way no business deal ever had. His office was still a constant whirlwind of activity. But now, it wasn't the only thing that mattered to him. He made sure his mornings began early, getting Ava ready for school, making sure she had a good breakfast, and making her feel safe. There were days when he wondered if he was doing everything right. He had a million questions, none of which he could answer. But every time Ava smiled at him, or when she turned to him for comfort after a nightmare, Caleb knew he was doing something right. The bond between them was growing. It wasn't immediate. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. He had set up a small room for Ava in his home, a room that was now filled with her toys, her drawings, and a few books she had picked out. Every morning when she woke up, she would run to him with a smile, telling him about her dreams and asking him what the day would bring. Caleb couldn't help but feel overwhelmed with emotion every time she did that. She was no longer the scared, fragile girl he had found on the snowy bench. She was beginning to heal, slowly but surely. Still, there were moments when Caleb would see the sadness in her eyes, the haunting memories that she carried with her. He knew there was more to her story, more than she was ready to share, and he didn't push her. He knew she would tell him when she was ready, but he also knew that the scars from her past weren't just physical. They were emotional. He had seen it in the way she flinched when a loud noise startled her, or the way she clung to him in the middle of the night as if she feared he might disappear. It was in those moments that Caleb realized just how deep her pain ran. And it was in those moments that he promised himself he would never let her feel alone again. As weeks passed, Caleb began researching ways to provide the emotional support Ava needed. He found a therapist who specialized in trauma and began taking Ava to sessions. At first, she resisted. She didn't want to talk about her past, didn't want to open up to anyone. But Caleb gently reassured her that it was okay, that they were in this together, and that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world by herself. Slowly, Ava started to trust the therapist, and little by little, she began to open up. It wasn't easy. There were tears. There were moments of frustration, but Caleb was there through it all. He was her constant, her protector. And in time, Ava began to show more of who she really was, her sense of humor, her curiosity, her warmth. Caleb marveled at how much she had changed, how much she had grown in such a short period. But he also knew they had a long road ahead of them. Healing wasn't linear. There would be setbacks, moments when Ava would regress or shut down. But Caleb was prepared for that. He had learned that love wasn't about perfection. It was about consistency, about being there, day after day, even when things got hard. As he watched Ava laugh and play in the living room one evening, Caleb couldn't help but think about the life he had once envisioned for himself. He had always imagined a life of power, success, and wealth. But now, as he watched Ava's joyful face, he realized that this was the life he had always been searching for, the life that truly mattered. It was a life full of purpose, full of love, and full of hope. He had made a promise to her, and he was determined to keep it. He would always be there for her, no matter what. And as Ava ran up to him with a drawing she had made at school, Caleb realized something he hadn't fully understood before. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. She had changed him, too. She had given him a reason to believe in something greater than himself. And as he looked into her eyes, he knew that he would do anything to make sure she felt loved, safe, and valued for the rest of her life. Ava was his daughter now, and he was her father. No matter what the future held, that was the truth that would never change. It had been several months since Caleb had made the decision to take Ava into his care, and things had slowly started to settle into a routine. Ava was no longer the scared, fragile girl who had been abandoned in the snow. She had begun to flourish in her new environment, and Caleb had begun to see the girl she was meant to be: strong, intelligent, and full of potential. But as time went on, Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that there was something Ava was still hiding. Despite the progress she had made, there were still moments when she would retreat into herself, pulling away from him when he tried to connect. He had been patient with her, giving her space when she needed it. But the silence between them sometimes felt like a wall. He had no idea what was going on in her mind, and that uncertainty began to eat away at him. Caleb had never been afraid of challenges. In his career, he had faced countless obstacles, always finding a way to overcome them. But this was different. This was about a little girl, his daughter now, and he didn't know how to fix what he couldn't see. He had tried everything: therapy, open conversations, patience, but Ava still carried something deep inside her that she wasn't ready to share. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, Caleb watched Ava carefully as she drew in her notebook. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, but there was a sadness behind her eyes, a weariness that hadn't been there before. Caleb could see the shadows of her past creeping back into her thoughts, even in the midst of their peaceful home. She had come so far, yet she was still battling the ghosts of what she had endured before. "Ava," Caleb said gently, his voice breaking the quiet, "you know you can talk to me, right?" Ava didn't look up from her drawing, but he saw her hands tremble slightly. "I'm okay, Dad," she whispered, her voice soft but distant. Caleb's heart sank at her words. She had started calling him Dad. It was a step forward, a huge step forward, but he knew there was still something she wasn't ready to face. "You don't have to be okay all the time," Caleb replied, his voice steady but filled with compassion. "I'm here for you, no matter what. You don't have to hide anything from me." Ava's hand paused, and for a moment, Caleb thought she might finally open up. But then, just as quickly, she began to draw again, her movements quick and frantic, as if trying to push him away. Caleb took a deep breath, willing himself to remain calm. He couldn't force her to talk, but he could make sure she knew that he was there, that he wasn't going anywhere. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "Ava," he said softly, "whatever it is, we'll face it together. You don't have to go through this alone." Ava looked up at him then, her eyes filled with uncertainty, but also with a flicker of something else. Hope, maybe, or trust. For the first time in a long time, she didn't look at him like he was a stranger. She looked at him like he was someone who could help her heal. And that was all Caleb needed. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be moments when Ava would regress, when the scars of her past would resurface. But Caleb wasn't going anywhere. He had made a promise to her, and he would keep it. He would be there for her, no matter what. That night, after Ava had gone to bed, Caleb sat alone in the living room, reflecting on everything that had happened. His life had changed in ways he never expected. But as he thought about Ava, about how far she had come, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had been through so much, and yet, she was still here, still fighting. He knew it wasn't going to be easy for either of them, but he also knew that he had made the right decision. Ava had a future now. She had a family. Caleb was her father now, and nothing was going to take that away. He stood up from the chair, walking to the window. The city lights outside were bright, almost blinding in their intensity, but Caleb didn't mind. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. He had found something that no amount of wealth or success could ever give him purpose. And it was all because of a little girl who had changed his life in ways he never thought possible. He turned away from the window, a quiet smile on his face. Tomorrow was another day, another step forward, and he was ready for whatever came next. Ava's healing wasn't just about fixing her broken past. It was about building something new, something better, and Caleb would be there every step of the way. It had been 6 months since Caleb had made the decision to give Ava the life she deserved, and the transformation was nothing short of remarkable. Ava was no longer the fragile girl who had been left alone in the cold. She was thriving, finding joy in the little things. A smile from Caleb, a kind word from her teachers, or a new friend at school. But as much as things had improved, Caleb knew there were still challenges ahead. Ava had come so far, but there were still times when the shadows of her past lingered. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Caleb could hear her soft cries from down the hall, a haunting reminder of the pain she had endured. He would go to her room, sit by her bed, and hold her until the tears stopped. It wasn't easy, and he knew that healing wouldn't happen overnight. But he was determined to be there for her every step of the way. One afternoon, as Ava was getting ready for school, she looked at Caleb with a seriousness that took him by surprise. "Dad," she said quietly, "I want to find my mom." Caleb's heart sank. He had expected this moment, but it didn't make it any easier. For months, he had been her constant, the one she turned to for comfort and security. But now, she was asking for something he wasn't sure he could provide. "Ava," Caleb began, his voice gentle but firm, "I know you want to find your mom, but you need to understand that I'm here for you. I will always be here for you, and I will help you with whatever you need, even if we don't have all the answers right now." Ava's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. I need to know where she is. Why did she leave me?" Caleb could see the pain in her eyes, the same pain he had seen in her face when they first met. He felt a lump form in his throat, but he fought to keep his emotions in check. He didn't want Ava to see how much her words hurt him. "I can't answer that, sweetheart," he said softly. "But I promise you, I'll help you find out. We'll do this together, okay?" Ava nodded, and for the first time in weeks, Caleb saw a small flicker of hope in her eyes. It was a step forward, a step toward healing. But Caleb knew that the road ahead would be complicated. He wasn't sure how they would find her mother, or even if they could. But he was willing to do whatever it took. He had come this far, and there was no turning back. That evening, Caleb sat down at his desk and began to make calls. He reached out to private investigators, social workers, and anyone who might have information about Ava's mother. It was a long shot, but he wasn't going to let her down. He had to try. The next few weeks were filled with a mix of hope and disappointment. Some leads turned out to be dead ends, while others led to more questions than answers. But through it all, Caleb remained by Ava's side. They talked about her mother, about what it would mean to find her, and about the possibility that Ava might never get the closure she was seeking. It was a difficult conversation to have, but Caleb knew it was one they needed to have. He wanted Ava to understand that while finding her mother was important, her life didn't depend on it. She was already loved, already valued, already enough. One rainy afternoon, Caleb received a call that changed everything. The private investigator had found someone who might be able to help a woman who had known Ava's mother and who might have some answers. Caleb's heart raced as he listened to the details. The woman was willing to meet, and Caleb arranged a time and place for them to sit down and talk. He wasn't sure what they would learn, but he knew this could be the moment that gave Ava the answers she had been searching for. The day of the meeting arrived, and Caleb could feel the tension in the air. Ava was nervous, her fingers twisting in her lap as they sat in the small, quiet cafe. Caleb squeezed her hand, offering her a reassuring smile. "We'll get through this together," he said softly. When the woman arrived, she was older than Caleb had imagined, with kind eyes and a tired expression. She sat down across from them, her gaze immediately landing on Ava. "You must be Ava," she said gently. "I've heard so much about you." Ava nodded shyly, her eyes wide with uncertainty. Caleb could see the hesitation in her face, the fear of what this woman might say. The woman took a deep breath and began to speak, telling them what she knew about Ava's mother. She had been struggling with addiction, and when Ava was just a baby, her mother had made the difficult decision to leave her with a relative. She had tried to get clean, to come back for Ava, but she had disappeared into a world of her own demons. Caleb could see the weight of the woman's words sink in for Ava. She had wanted so badly to hear that her mother loved her, that her mother cared. But the truth was far more complicated. The conversation lasted for hours, and while it didn't bring Ava the closure she had hoped for, It did provide answers. Caleb watched as Ava processed everything the woman had said, her face a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I'm sorry," the woman said softly, her voice breaking. "I wish things had been different for you." Ava didn't say anything at first. She just sat there, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling with emotion. Caleb reached out and gently pulled her into a hug, holding her tight as she cried. It wasn't the end of her search for answers, but it was a beginning. Ava had learned the truth, and now they could move forward together. Caleb held her, feeling the weight of her grief and the power of their bond. No matter what came next, they had each other, and that was all they needed to keep moving forward. As the months continued to pass, Caleb and Ava found themselves in a delicate but comfortable routine. Ava had begun to thrive more and more each day, her laughter filling the house more often than not. But the path to healing was far from straightforward. Caleb could see the emotional scars that lingered, even as the physical ones began to fade. Ava was slowly becoming the bright, curious girl he had always hoped she would be. But her struggles were never far from the surface. She was learning to trust, learning to feel safe. But there were still days when the weight of her past would pull her back into the darkness. Caleb was aware of it, but he refused to let her go through it alone. He made it his mission to be there for every step of the journey. One morning, as Ava was getting ready for school, Caleb noticed something unusual. She had her jacket on, her shoes laced up, but she wasn't moving. She stood in front of the mirror, her expression unreadable. Caleb walked over to her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "Ava, are you okay?" She turned to face him, her eyes filled with hesitation. "I'm fine," she said, though her voice was shaky. Caleb could see through the facade. He knelt down to her level, his voice soft but filled with concern. "You don't have to hide it. You can talk to me." Ava didn't answer immediately. She just stood there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Caleb could see the storm of emotions behind her eyes. After what felt like an eternity, Ava finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't want to be weak," she said, the words breaking Caleb's heart. He felt his own emotions swell as he heard her. He understood her fear all too well. She had spent so long being abandoned and neglected, always told she wasn't enough. And now, when she finally had someone who loved her, she was still scared that showing weakness would make her unworthy of that love. Caleb took her hands gently in his, looking directly into her eyes. "Ava, there is nothing weak about asking for help. You don't have to carry everything on your own anymore. I'm here, and you are enough, just the way you are. I love you, and that doesn't change, no matter what." Ava's eyes welled up with tears, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself cry. Caleb pulled her into a warm, tight embrace, holding her as she sobbed. He didn't know all the answers. He didn't know how to fix everything. But he knew that this, right here, was what Ava needed most, his unwavering support. After a few moments, Ava pulled away slightly, wiping her eyes. "I don't want to be sad anymore," she said softly. Caleb smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You don't have to be happy all the time. You can feel however you feel. But I will always be here to listen, to help you through it." Ava nodded, a small, hopeful smile appearing on her face. She wasn't fully healed, but she was learning to let go of the guilt and the fear that had held her back for so long. The weight of her past was still there, but she was beginning to understand that she didn't have to carry it alone. As they left for school, Caleb noticed a change in Ava. She seemed lighter somehow, more at ease. He knew there would be more tough days ahead, but today felt like a victory. They were making progress, one small step at a time. That night, After Ava had gone to bed, Caleb sat in the living room, reflecting on everything they had been through. He thought about the first time he met her, how broken and lost she had seemed. He thought about the long nights spent comforting her, the moments of doubt and fear. But as he thought about how far she had come, how much stronger she was, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Ava wasn't just surviving anymore. She was beginning to thrive. He had given her a chance, but in many ways, she had given him a new perspective on life. He had been so focused on his career, on building something for himself. But now he realized that the most important thing he could build was a family. And Ava had brought him something that no amount of money or success ever could. The realization that love, patience, and understanding were the things that truly made life worth living. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The world was still chaotic, still uncertain. But in this moment, he knew he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He had found a new purpose, one that didn't involve numbers or deals, but a little girl who had shown him what it truly meant to love and be loved in return. And that was more than enough. The days following their conversation were filled with small victories. Caleb could see Ava beginning to open up more, starting to share the little moments of joy that she had once kept hidden. They were slowly rebuilding her sense of trust in the world. Caleb had always been a man who prided himself on his ability to navigate challenges, but this was different. This was about healing, not conquering. It was about patience, understanding, and love. Every day, he was reminded that these were the things that mattered most. One evening, after they had finished dinner, Caleb noticed Ava fidgeting with her hands. She had been quieter than usual, her eyes distant as she stared down at her plate. Caleb set down his fork and reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. "What's on your mind?" he asked softly. Ava hesitated for a moment before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about my mom," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. Caleb's heart tightened, but he kept his expression calm, his voice steady. "I know you're thinking about her a lot, sweetie. It's okay to miss her. But remember, you're not alone anymore. I'm here for you, and I always will be." Ava wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But it's not the same," she whispered. "I don't know if I'll ever be okay with what happened." Caleb felt a deep sadness for her. He couldn't imagine what it felt like to carry that kind of weight, to have unanswered questions, to feel abandoned by the one person who should have been there. He took a deep breath before speaking. "Ava, you don't have to have all the answers right now, and it's okay to be confused and upset. Healing doesn't happen overnight, and it's not a straight line. But I want you to know that no matter how you feel, I'm here. You can talk to me about anything, and we'll figure it out together." Ava looked up at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "I don't know how to stop feeling sad," she said softly. Caleb squeezed her hand. "It's not about stopping the sadness, Ava. It's about learning how to live with it, how to keep going even when things are hard. And we'll do that together." After a moment of silence, Ava nodded slowly. Caleb could see the uncertainty in her face, but there was something else there too: hope. It was a small spark, but it was there. He was doing the right thing. He knew it. This was their journey together, and no matter how difficult it might be, he would never let her go. Over the next few days, Caleb made it a priority to keep their connection strong. He spent more time with Ava after school, reading together, playing games, and simply talking. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when Ava would retreat into herself, moments when the weight of her past would seem too heavy for her to bear. But Caleb was patient. He had learned that healing was not about fixing things instantly, but about showing up every day, offering unconditional support and love. One afternoon, Caleb was driving Ava home from school when she spoke up, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, "do you think I'll ever stop missing her?" Caleb glanced over at her, his heart aching. He didn't have an easy answer for that. "I don't know, sweetheart," he said honestly, "but I do know that you have a family here now. You have me, and I'll always be here for you, no matter what." Ava nodded slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Caleb smiled back, feeling a warmth spread through him. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be without challenges, but as he looked at Ava, he felt a sense of peace that he hadn't known in years. This was the life he had been meant to live, not one focused on wealth or success, but one built on love, understanding, and family. That night, after Ava had gone to bed, Caleb sat quietly in the living room, reflecting on everything they had been through. He thought about the first time he met Ava, how broken she had been, how lost she had seemed. He thought about the countless hours spent reassuring her, holding her, helping her work through the pain of her past. But as he thought about how far she had come, how much more at peace she seemed, he couldn't help but feel proud. She was his daughter now, and he was proud of the person she was becoming. For the first time in a long time, Caleb felt like he was exactly where he was meant to be. He had spent so many years chasing success, trying to build an empire. But now, with Ava by his side, he realized that the true success in life was about the people you loved, the connections you made, and the way you helped others heal. Ava had changed his life in ways he could never have imagined. She had given him a new purpose, and for that, he would be forever grateful. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but Caleb was ready. He wasn't just a businessman anymore, he was a father. And nothing else mattered more. The following months were some of the most transformative in Caleb's life. He had never imagined that becoming a father would change him so profoundly, but each day with Ava was a reminder of what truly mattered. The house that had once felt cold and empty now felt full of life. There was laughter in the halls, voices echoing in the rooms, and a sense of warmth that Caleb hadn't known in years. Ava was no longer the quiet, withdrawn girl who had arrived at his doorstep. She had grown stronger, more confident, and although there were still moments of pain and confusion, she had begun to find her way. Caleb was constantly amazed at her resilience. Every day, she worked through her fears, through the doubts that still lingered from her past. And with each small step forward, she built a future she had once thought was out of reach. But even though things were better, Caleb couldn't help but notice the moments when Ava seemed distant. She would go through periods of withdrawal, retreating to her room for hours, lost in her thoughts. Caleb understood that healing wasn't linear, that there would be setbacks along the way. But it didn't make it any easier to watch. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, casting a soft glow over the house, Caleb found Ava sitting on the porch, staring out into the yard. He could tell something was troubling her, and despite his usual patience, the worry he felt for her grew with each passing day. He walked out to the porch and sat beside her, unsure of what to say. "Hey, kiddo," he said gently, his voice calm but full of concern. Ava didn't immediately respond. She just kept staring ahead, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. Caleb's heart ached as he watched her, knowing that whatever she was going through, she was doing it alone in her mind. After a long pause, Ava finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I still don't know what happened to her," she said, her words heavy with emotion. Caleb's heart broke at the rawness of her pain. He knew this was something Ava had been carrying, something that had always been there in the background, even as she seemed to move forward. "I know," Caleb replied softly, his hand reaching out to gently touch her shoulder. It's hard to have those answers, but I promise you, I'll always be here for you. Even when you're not sure about things, you don't have to carry this alone. Ava looked up at him, her eyes filled with tears. I just don't understand why she left. Why didn't she want me? The question hung in the air, and Caleb felt the weight of it. It was a question that, as much as he wished he could answer, had no easy solution. Sweetheart, I can't pretend to know the answers, Caleb said, his voice gentle but firm. But what I do know is that you're not alone anymore. I'm here, and I will never leave you. You're loved, you're wanted, and you matter. More than anything in this world, you matter to me. Ava sniffled, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. But what if I never find out? What if I never get the answers I'm looking for? Caleb took a deep breath, his chest heavy with the emotion of the moment. Then we'll figure it out together. We may not get the answers, but you have a family now. You have me. And I will make sure you never feel like you're alone in this. Ava looked at him, her gaze softer now, though there was still a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. But what if it's not enough? She asked, her voice trembling. Caleb smiled, his heart swelling with love for her. It's more than enough, he said gently, and we'll make sure that, no matter what happens, you never doubt how much you're loved. We'll keep moving forward. We'll keep healing. Together. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their conversation hanging between them. But there was also a sense of peace. Ava was still hurting, still carrying the weight of her past. But Caleb knew that this was another step in her healing process. It wasn't about finding answers that would solve everything. It was about the love they had for each other, the commitment they had made to move forward, no matter how long it took. As the sun finally set, Caleb stood up and offered his hand to Ava. Come on, kiddo. Let's go inside. It's getting late, and I think we both could use a good movie night. Ava smiled, a small but genuine smile, and took his hand. Yeah, I think that sounds good. As they walked back inside, Caleb's heart felt lighter. It wasn't the end of the road for them, not by a long shot, but it was another step forward, another piece of healing. And that was enough for now. He knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Together, the years passed by in what felt like the blink of an eye. And in that time, Caleb watched as Ava transformed from the fragile girl he had taken in, unsure of herself and the world, into a confident young woman with a future full of possibilities. She had come a long way, but more importantly, she had found her place in the world. She had found her family. There had been moments of doubt, of course. There had been days when Caleb wondered if he was doing the right thing, if he was enough for her. But every time Ava looked at him and called him Dad, he knew he had made the right choice. He had chosen to love her, to be there for her, no matter the cost. And it was a choice that had changed both of their lives in ways they would never have imagined. As Ava approached graduation, Caleb was filled with pride. It seemed like just yesterday she had been a scared little girl, unwilling to trust anyone. But now she stood on the brink of a bright future, ready to take on the world. Caleb couldn't help but think back to that cold winter day when they first met, when everything in his life had changed. He had never imagined how much a single act of kindness could alter the course of his life. But here he was, a father in every sense of the word, and Ava was his daughter. It was a bond, stronger than blood. Graduation day came, and as Caleb sat in the audience, watching Ava walk across the stage to receive her diploma, he couldn't hold back the tears. Not because he was sad, but because he was proud. Proud of the young woman she had become. Proud of how far they had come together. When she finally reached him, Holding her diploma, she threw her arms around him. "We did it, Dad," she whispered. Caleb hugged her tight, his heart swelling with emotion. "No," he said, pulling back slightly to look at her. "You did it. You've worked so hard, Ava. I'm so proud of you." Ava smiled, wiping a tear from her own cheek. "I couldn't have done it without you." Caleb knew that wasn't entirely true. Ava had done the hard work herself. She had faced her fears, confronted her past, and come out stronger on the other side. But he also knew that he had played a part in it. He had been her rock, her constant, and together, they had built something beautiful. As they walked off the stage together, hand in hand, Caleb felt a deep sense of gratitude. Gratitude for the journey they had been on, for the love they had shared, and for the future that lay ahead of them. The years ahead would bring new challenges, but Caleb no longer felt afraid. With Ava by his side, he knew they could handle anything. It wasn't about wealth or success anymore. It was about love, family, and the simple joy of knowing they were there for each other, no matter what. Ava had found her place in the world, but so had Caleb. It wasn't the place he had once dreamed of, but it was better. It was real. It was home. They were home. And as they walked out of the stadium together, Caleb felt peace in his heart for the first time in a long time. He had built a family, not on money or status, but on love. And that was all he had ever needed. Ava looked up at him, smiling. "So, what's next, Dad?" Caleb smiled back, his heart full. "Whatever we decide, sweetheart," he said. "The world is ours. Together."